okay, this is what NATO looks like. And you can look at the United States with our western and eastern coasts that are unencumbered. You wouldn't be able to blockade those. The two narrow seas are the Sea of Labrador and the Caribbean. But basically, hard to imagine that the United States Navy wouldn't be able to deploy in wartime. And same thing true on the big peninsula of Europe. Yeah, I get it. Turkey may not be able to deploy, but Spain, France, and Norway, they're these unencumbered coastlines. They'll probably get their navies out. Eurasia is a completely different story. This is where China and Russia live. No one's done this to them. This is just the way it is. It's all of these narrow seas that become kill zones in wartime. I've described it to you how it works. And I get it, there's the Arctic up there, but there's no economic activity or population. So being able to run things in the Arctic doesn't do you very good. Do you very much good. So nature naturally contains both Russia and China. It's just the way it is. So let's start with Putin here, Vlad the Bad, on his little Mongol pony, a continental mode of transport. If you live there, what can you get out of it? It's a long horse ride if you're going to do it that way. So whom can he blockade? Well, he's got one aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, which has been under repair since 2018, long time to be in the shop. It required the largest dry dock that Russia has to repair it, and then it flipped the dry dock, which then gashed the hull. And there's been all sorts of charges of embezzlement, various fires on board. It's not getting repaired anytime fast. And it's just like an occupational hazard problem. So that one's not doing him any good. Putin has got two liquid playgrounds that he likes. One's the Black Sea. Before he got involved with Ukraine, in theory, he could have blockaded, I guess, Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, and Georgia if he wanted to. That was why he's so interested in the Kerch Strait, which would blockade the Sea of Azov, because he wanted to take Ukraine from east to west. That was part of the plan. Oh, yeah, and he used to have, or maybe still does, unknown, one overseas base, Tartus, Syria. Talk about a garden spot. And I guess if you want to go bomb civilians, that would be a location for you. But now that Bashar al-Assad has moved to Moscow, it's unclear how that works. But in any case, it's a useless base because in wartime, no one gets through the Dardanelles. That place can be shut down with mines. And the Ukrainians have shown that you don't even need a navy to stop a navy in narrow seas. It should be a real wake-up call to anyone on a narrow sea that just by using drones and shore or ordnance and planes and things that you can wreck navies. And in fact, the Russian naval base used to be at Sevastopol on Crimea. Putin's had to move it to Novorossiysk. Great. So he can't do too much there. Have fun with that one. So there are many fewer possibilities for him nowadays. His second favorite liquid playground is the Baltic. Kaliningrad is sovereign Russian territory. So back in the day, I guess, if they wanted to blockade the Baltic states, they could try it. But after the latest iteration of the Ukraine war, Sweden and Finland have ditched neutrality. They're part of NATO. Baltic states are also NATO. So the Baltic is really a NATO lake. There's not too much Putin can do there. So his latest gig is cutting underseas cables. That's about where he's at. I mean, look about trying to leave the Baltic. It doesn't happen in wartime. You're stuck in there. So it turns out that Russia is much more vulnerable to blockade than the other way around because it's very easy to close up the Baltic and Black Seas. You look out on what's going on, and they're hemmed in, and it's all way up north. Russia has two really big naval bases, one on the Bering Sea and one on the Barents Sea. But the problem is when they deploy out of those bases, they have to go by NATO territory. So in the Barents Sea, you can see why Greenland and Iceland are so strategic, because for Russia to deploy, it's got to go in between those places. And then on the Bering Sea, the more promising one for Russia, it has to go by the United States. But the problem is, how do you supply the thing on the Bering Sea? It's just a long way from any industrial base. So another part of Putin's sad story has to do with NATO. So if you look at NATO, you can look at its accession in arcs. Initially, in the Cold War, the early Cold War, it's all of these smaller European nations, and everybody's smaller than Russia. It's by far the biggest country on the planet, and why they need more territory remains a mystery. But initially, it's the smaller places joining NATO to protect themselves. And then at the implosion of the Soviet Union, it's all its former satellites fleeing at the first possible moment and saying, NATO, NATO, let me in. And then with the Ukraine 2022, part of the Ukraine war, Sweden and Finland, which long had preferred neutrality, said, whoa, no, we're going to join NATO. Now, the Russians look at this and they go, well, this is NATO coming at us in arcs. They're ignoring their complicity in all of this. If you occupy places and brutalize them for generations, this is what you get. So here is Putin's muse, or I don't know if it's his muse, but it's a guy who expresses a lot of ideas like Putin's, Alexander Dugin. Here's his view of how the world should be. It's not over a universal rules-based order where we all trade with each other. It's rather, we're going to divide it up into these spheres of influence where each is a world unto itself. Dugin's worked it out for all of us. But here are the places that Russia's actually taken lately. At the end of the Cold War, it took Transnistria from Moldova. In 2008, it took Abkhazia and South Ossetia from Georgia. And then 2014, it's taking Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk from Ukraine. And then look how it really works. This is a continental view. You want to color it all in. That's what the 2022 invasion of Ukraine is. It's the way a continental power looks at territory. All right. The United States thinks that Putin is just all worried about us and NATO. Actually, Putin's problem is China. NATO doesn't want Russian territory. Who would want it? It's full of Russians. Stay at home, please. Don't leave. But China might want. And also Putin has said, if you really feel deeply about a place, forget about boundary treaties, you should be able to take it. Well, Tsarist Russia took a lot of places from China that the Chinese might feel deeply about that have precisely the resources that China needs, not only energy and all those sorts of things out in Siberia, but water. Lake Baikal holds 20% of the world's surface fresh water, and China's been blowing through its water table in North China. And that one, I think the topography works that you could do you could pipe it all in. So here's Putin dumping his ordnance on Ukraine that never wanted to invade. While he's letting this problem metastasize. Oh, and speaking of the problem, here he is. What are Xi Jinping's possibilities? You like the little natty upgraded mouse suit? Here's his world. Welcome to it. And what he's got are 20 neighbors, 13 by land, 7 by sea, many of which despise China for excellent reasons. Not all of them, but some of them. And if you look at it, it's all of these narrow seas. If Xi Jinping wanted to blockade somebody, I guess you could try Korea because you got the Yellow Sea and then the Sea of Japan, except Japan sits out there. That's a complicating factor. Better bets in the South China Sea because Vietnam, Brunei, and Cambodia, they don't have alternate coastlines. If they want to reach the open oceans, they've got to transit the South China Sea. However, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Taiwan, all have other coastlines that face the high seas. And remember, I've just given you a whole discussion about the Battle of the Atlantic, where when people have a high seas access, it's really difficult to shut them down because China would have to go all the way around to be on the far side to shut everything down on the other side, or maybe they're just going to obliterate it. I don't know. But anyway, the South China Sea is such a legal mess. No one knows who owns what. And in any kind of war, you're going to have all these neutrals who might suddenly join sides if they don't like what's happening. But you can get a sense of what the possibilities are there. It's very difficult. Usually in a war, we've already done narrow seas, right? The North Sea, the Baltic, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, they shut down in wartime to commercial traffic. It simply can't make it through, and surface fleets have great difficulty. And if the neighbors, as Ukraine has shown, just buy the right drones and since the sea is a little bigger, buy some submarines, some planes, shore artillery, that might be enough to just close down China's merchant marine, certainly the merchant marine, but also its navy. So If you want to go the other way of, well, what about Xi Jinping doing a surprise visit on the West Coast? There's a lot of open ocean. Hawaii would be the nearest big island. And it's a long way away, and Hawaii is dependent on imports for everything. It's not very useful. But for the United States going the other way, the islands get bigger and better the closer to China that you get. So, to leave you with Alfred Thayer Mahan, captain and later admiral, by far the most famous person ever associated with the U.S. Naval War College, where I spent my career. Here are his prerequisites for playing the maritime game. One, you need a moat. You've got to have insulation from attack if you want to play this game. You need a dense internal transportation grid to get the goods out in peacetime, reliable egress by sea to get the Navy out in wartime, a dense coastal population that's going to be running all the trade, commerce-driven economy, and then you need a government that's stable, that is going to support funding a Navy and supporting commerce. Okay, let's line up Russia and China with these prerequisites. Well, neither one's got a moat. They got more neighbors than any other two other countries on the planet. So definitely not that. Internal transportation grid, Russia's remains lamentable. China's is getting better. Neither one has reliable egress by sea with these narrow seas. Sure, Russia's got the Arctic, but there's nothing up there. I mean, they're polar bears. Great, go get bitten. And as for dense coastal population, yes, China has a dense coastal population, but Russia doesn't, way up north. Russia's never had a commerce-driven economy. China was more so under Deng Xiaoping, but under Xi Jinping, he is privileging the crony sector over the private sector, and neither one has stable government institutions. The litmus test of that one is whether you have transparent, regular transfers of power, usually through elections, and dictator for life does not remotely qualify. So, sure, China and Russia remain continental problems, but I don't think they understand the maritime limitations of where they're at. And of course,